When my son was 9, I carried him 3 miles through a storm after he broke his ankle on a hiking trail. 22 years later, that same boy left me alone in an Alaskan forest, smiled, and said, "If you hear something behind you, Dad, it's probably a grizzly." Then he walked away, carrying my backpack, my food, and the emergency beacon. I had 1 bottle of water, a pocket knife, and a phone with 42% battery. Dalton knew all of that because he had checked my supplies 10 minutes earlier. This was not a careless prank. My son had measured exactly how frightened I would be and decided my fear would make the story funnier. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. My name is William Crawford. I was 58 years old, and before Alaska, I believed patience could eventually turn an irresponsible son into a decent man. That belief had cost me more than money. It had cost Dalton the opportunity to learn that choices carry consequences. He was our only child. Eleanor suffered 2 miscarriages before he was born, so when Dalton arrived, we treated him less like a baby and more like proof that life had finally shown us mercy. We photographed every birthday, attended every school event, and rearranged our schedules whenever he needed us. I worked fleet maintenance at the Port of San Francisco, the kind of job that left grease beneath my fingernails no matter how hard I scrubbed. Eleanor worked part-time as a paralegal. We were not wealthy, but Dalton never knew what it felt like to go without something important. When he wanted to play baseball, I coached. When piano lessons made him miserable, Eleanor let him quit because she believed joy could not be forced. When he struggled in school, we paid for tutoring. Each decision came from love. Together they taught him that discomfort was always temporary, because one of us would remove it. We paid every dollar of his college tuition. He graduated without debt and returned home for 3 months while searching for the right career. 3 months became a year. A year became 5. At 31, Dalton still lived in his childhood bedroom, parked in our driveway, ate groceries Eleanor purchased, and contributed nothing toward the mortgage or utilities. He had a marketing job and earned enough to rent an apartment. Instead, he spent his salary on restaurants, electronics, weekend trips, and payments on an SUV he could barely afford. Whenever I raised the subject of rent, Eleanor asked me to give him more time. "He's saving," she would say. I wanted to believe her, so I never asked to see the savings. I confused avoiding conflict with preserving the family. Dalton learned that if he delayed responsibility long enough, his mother would soften the question, and his father would eventually stop asking it. The warning signs were not dramatic. They arrived through small moments. He borrowed my truck and returned it empty. He used my tools without putting them back. He missed Eleanor's birthday dinner because his friends invited him to a concert, then arrived the next morning with flowers and a smile that made her forgive him before he apologized. None of those actions seemed large enough to justify a rupture. That was how the pattern survived. Every offense was small when viewed alone, while the entitlement growing beneath them became enormous. I still loved the person I remembered. I saw the boy who once made me a Father's Day card from macaroni and construction paper, not the man who expected his parents to fund a life he never intended to build himself. Eleanor saw him the same way. Love preserved an old photograph of Dalton in our minds, while the real man changed outside the frame. The evening he proposed the Alaska trip, I was replacing a loose hinge on a kitchen cabinet. "Dad," he said, "I think we need time together. A real father-son trip." Those words reached the part of me that had been waiting years for him to notice the distance between us. Eleanor's face brightened immediately. I should have asked why a son who rarely shared dinner suddenly wanted 7 days in the wilderness. Instead, I heard an apology he had never spoken. I believed Alaska might strip away the excuses and return the son I had raised. I did not understand that the wilderness would reveal something else. Dalton had not failed to grow up because nobody taught him how. He had failed because every time life prepared a lesson, Eleanor and I stepped between him and the consequence. In Alaska, for the first time, neither of us would reach him before the lesson arrived. Unfortunately, he intended to teach it to me. "Alaska?" I asked. Dalton leaned against the kitchen doorway with the easy smile that had rescued him from consequences since childhood. 7 days. No work, no phones, no lectures about rent, just mountains, fishing, and us. Eleanor stopped preparing dinner and looked between us. Her expression carried so much hope that refusing felt like breaking something fragile. "Your father has always wanted to see Alaska," she said. Dalton nodded. "I know. That's why I chose it." I should have noticed how carefully he delivered that answer. Dalton rarely remembered plans I mentioned the previous week. Yet he suddenly remembered a dream I had spoken about years earlier. Instead, I felt seen by my son for the first time in a long while. "When?" I asked. "Late May. The daylight lasts forever, and the weather should be manageable." "You researched it?" "I've been planning for weeks." That should also have warned me. Dalton normally planned trips by purchasing a ticket and discovering the remaining details after arrival. Now he had routes, campground reservations, equipment lists, and printed maps. I mistook preparation for maturity. "There is one change," he added. "Miles and Wallace want to come." The father-son trip had expanded before I agreed to it. Miles was 29, polite, soft-spoken, and permanently attached to his phone. He had eaten at our table enough times to call Eleanor Mrs. C. Wallace was different. At 32, he treated every room like an audience. His jokes usually required someone else to become smaller so he could become funnier. I had watched him embarrass waiters, imitate strangers, and film people without permission. Dalton always laughed hardest around him. "I thought this was supposed to be about us," I said. "It still is. They'll help with gear and driving. Besides, Wallace knows Alaska." "Has he lived there?" "No, but he's camped there twice." Eleanor touched my arm. "It could still be good for you." I looked at her and understood what she was asking. She was not asking me to trust Wallace. She was asking me to give our son another chance. "All right," I said. "But we follow established trails, carry emergency equipment, and leave a complete route with your mother." Dalton stepped forward and hugged me. It was brief and awkward, but I held on a second longer than he did. "You won't regret it," he said. Over the next month, he took control of nearly every detail. He insisted we use his newer SUV, booked the flights, and purchased the camping permits. When I suggested renting a satellite communicator, Wallace laughed during a planning call. "William, we're camping, not crossing Antarctica. Cell service disappears outside the towns. That's the point." I ordered an emergency beacon anyway. 2 days later, Dalton returned it and told me Wallace already had one for the group. I never saw it. Dalton also asked me to send photographs of everything I planned to carry so we would not duplicate supplies. I laid out my water filter, first aid kit, protein bars, knife, rain shell, flashlight, and thermal blanket. He studied the photograph and told me which items could remain in my main pack. Later, standing alone near that waterfall, I would remember that conversation and understand he knew exactly what I would have on my body and what he could remove by carrying my backpack away. At the time, it felt like organization. Eleanor packed beef jerky and labeled our medication. The night before departure, she placed both hands around my face. "If anything feels wrong, come home," she said. "It's a camping trip, not a military operation." She did not smile. "Promise me." "I promise." Dalton entered carrying my main pack. "This thing weighs too much," he said. "I'll reorganize it in the morning. Leave the emergency supplies where they are. Relax, Dad. I know what matters." Wallace sent a message to our group chat later that night. "Hope the old man can keep up." Dalton replied with a laughing emoji. I typed a response, deleted it, and went to bed. The next morning, Eleanor stood in the driveway in her bathrobe as we loaded the SUV. She hugged Dalton first. "Take care of your father." "Always," he said. The word came easily. During the drive to the airport, Wallace joked about bears. "You don't have to outrun the grizzly," he said. "You only have to outrun the slowest person." Miles looked uncomfortable. Dalton glanced at me through the mirror and smiled. "Dad's tougher than he looks." I chose to hear pride in his voice. I did not yet understand that they were already rehearsing the joke, and I was the only person in the vehicle who had not been told the ending. The flight to Anchorage took 4 hours. Dalton sat beside me, and spent most of it asking questions about my work at the port. He wanted to know how I coordinated 40 service vehicles across 3 shifts, and how I handled breakdowns when cargo schedules could not wait. Normally, his attention disappeared the moment I discussed work. This time, he listened closely. "I never realized how much pressure you handled," he said. I looked at my son and felt a door open between us. "You never asked. I'm asking now." Wallace and Miles sat across the aisle. Wallace glanced toward us and smiled, but there was something performative in it, as if he were pleased that Dalton had delivered a line correctly. I ignored the feeling. After landing, we collected the SUV and drove south toward Cooper Landing. The mountains rose on both sides of the highway, still covered with late snow. Dalton pulled over twice so I could take photographs. "Mom will want proof I brought you somewhere beautiful," he said. The first campsite was near a river, with water so clear I could count stones beneath the surface. We pitched 2 tents, gathered wood, and cooked over a fire. Miles burned his dinner and laughed at himself. Wallace told stories that became less believable with each beer. Dalton stayed close to me. He carried water when my knees grew stiff and handed me coffee before I asked. Every small kindness felt like evidence that Eleanor had been right. Our son had not become selfish beyond repair. He had simply needed space from the routines that allowed us to misunderstand each other. On the second night, Miles and Wallace went to sleep early. Dalton and I remained beside the dying fire. The Alaska sky never became completely dark. A pale band of light rested behind the mountains, while sparks rose between us. "Are you disappointed in me?" Dalton asked. The question caught me unprepared. "I worry about you." "That isn't an answer. Sometimes I'm disappointed in your choices. I have never been disappointed that you are my son." He stared into the fire. "I know I've stayed home too long." "Then change it. You make it sound simple." "Simple and easy are different things." Dalton nodded. He told me he had been seeing a teacher named Clara, and wanted to become the kind of man who could build a life with someone. "I don't want to be 35 and still sleeping in my childhood room. Neither do I." He laughed, and for a few minutes we sounded like a father and son who trusted each other. Before going to bed, he said, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I carried that sentence like a gift. I did not know it had been placed in my hands, so I would be holding something fragile when he decided to break it. On the third morning, Wallace announced that the tourist campground was too crowded. He had mapped a trail farther north, beyond the established camping areas, where the fishing was supposedly better. The route ended 4 miles inside dense spruce forest near a river clearing. "Is it permitted?" I asked. Wallace waved the printed map. "Public land. Completely legal. Does anyone know we're going there?" Dalton held up his phone. I sent Mom the location. Later, I learned he had sent her only the name of the nearest town, not the trail or campsite. We hiked for nearly 2 hours with full packs. Dalton carried my main pack for the final mile, claiming he wanted to protect my knees. The emergency beacon Wallace supposedly brought was clipped to his own belt. When I asked to inspect it, he said the battery was full and kept walking. The clearing was beautiful and isolated. We caught trout, built a fire, and listened to the river. Yet the mood had changed. Wallace repeatedly asked how far I could walk without resting. Dalton joked about whether I could navigate using moss. Miles laughed once, then looked ashamed. On the 4th morning, I woke to find all 3 men whispering near the SUV keys and folded maps. They stopped when I approached. "What did I interrupt?" I asked. "Wallace lost a bet," Dalton said. No one explained the bet. During breakfast, Dalton checked my phone battery and asked whether I still carried the pocket knife in my jacket. "Why?" "Just making sure you're prepared." Wallace smiled into his coffee. Then Dalton proposed a short hike to a waterfall 2 miles east. Miles and Wallace would remain behind to pack the camp. "Just you and me," Dalton said. The words echoed his original promise about Alaska. I wanted them to be sincere badly enough that I put on my boots. As we entered the trees, Wallace called after us, "Watch for bears." Dalton did not turn around, but I saw his shoulders move with silent laughter. 40 minutes later, the sound of rushing water filled the forest. My son led me toward the waterfall with one hand gripping the strap of my backpack, and for the last time, I believed he was carrying it to help me. The waterfall was loud enough to swallow every ordinary sound. Dalton led me beyond the marked overlook and down a path slick with moss, carrying my backpack over one shoulder. My knees ached, and I remember feeling grateful. I thought my son had finally learned to carry something for someone besides himself. At the bottom, the trail opened onto a shelf of black rock above the river. There was no railing, no sign, and no one else in sight. Dalton set down my pack. Worth the climb, right? I reached for my phone. Your mother will want a picture. He offered to take it, so I handed it over and stepped toward the view. Behind me, a zipper opened. When I turned, Dalton was removing the first aid pouch from my backpack. What are you doing? He pushed it into his own pack. Lightening your load. His voice was casual, but the warmth from the previous nights had vanished from his face. Miles stared at the ground. Wallace smiled, as if a cruel joke was about to begin. Dalton tossed my phone back. You always said hardship builds character, Dad. Wallace laughed. The old man gets to prove he can survive without ordering everyone around. I waited for Dalton to silence him. Instead, my son began dividing my belongings between their bags. My rain shell, food pouch, map, flashlight, and the spare battery Eleanor had bought for me. Put my things back, I said. Dalton placed my water bottle on the rock and dropped one protein bar beside it. You won't need the rest. Dalton. I said his name the way I had when he was a child running toward traffic. Frightened, firm, certain he would stop because I was his father. He kept packing. I stepped toward him, but Wallace moved between us. He never touched me. He did not need to. He was younger, heavier, and we were standing on wet stone where one shove could become an accident. Miles finally spoke. Dalton, this is far enough. No, Dalton replied. It's exactly far enough. Then he faced me. There was anger in his eyes, but beneath it was something colder, satisfaction. You wanted me to grow up. Now, you can learn what it feels like when someone decides you're on your own. I never abandoned you. You threatened to every time you mentioned rent, a deadline, or a real job. Asking a 31-year-old man to support himself is not abandonment. His jaw tightened. Maybe not to you. Then scattered details locked together. Their tents had been packed before breakfast. Dalton had told me to leave my heavier coat in the truck. He had checked my gear twice, taken back the emergency beacon, and said Wallace would carry it for everyone. Those choices had not been careless. They had been preparations. Where's the truck? I asked. Dalton tightened his straps. Far enough away to give you time to think. Your mother only knows the nearest town. She doesn't know this trail. Then you should start walking. Miles looked up sharply. You said we were leaving him for 20 minutes. Dalton's eyes flashed toward him. The silence that followed told me even his friends had not received the same plan. Give me the beacon, I said, or at least the map. Wallace patted his jacket pocket. The beacon stays with the group. I am part of the group. Dalton looked directly at me. Not anymore. 4 quiet words. They hurt more than the cold spray soaking through my shirt, more than the knowledge that my own son had brought me thousands of miles from home to punish me for asking him to become an adult. I turned to Miles. Are you going with them? Shame crossed his face. I'm sorry, Mr. Crawford. But he did not move toward me. Dalton lifted the last bag and turned away. If you leave me here, I called, something between us ends today. He stopped. Hope rose inside me so quickly it hurt. Then he glanced over his shoulder and said, That's the idea. They climbed the trail in single file. Wallace first, Dalton second, Miles last. Miles looked back twice, but Dalton shouted at him, and he kept moving. Within a minute, the trees had swallowed all 3 of them. I stood beside the water bottle and protein bar, listening for laughter or returning footsteps, anything proving this was only a vicious performance. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I called Dalton. 1 ring, then voicemail. My second call went straight there. Wallace did not answer. Miles's phone rang until the line died. My battery showed 42%, and the signal was too weak to load a map. I checked my pockets. A folding knife, my wallet, my phone, and the keys to a truck I could not find. That was all. I waited 20 minutes because Miles had said 20 minutes. I waited 30 because a father's heart can manufacture hope long after the facts have killed it. At 40 minutes, the wind shifted and the temperature fell. The rock beneath my shoes began to feel like ice. Somewhere inside the trees, a heavy branch cracked. I remembered carrying 9-year-old Dalton 3 miles through a storm after he broke his ankle. He had buried his face against my neck and begged me not to leave him. I had promised I never would. 22 years later, he had turned that promise into a weapon, certain I would forgive anything because I always had. The pain of that realization steadied me. I picked up the bottle and protein bar, looked at the empty trail, and forced myself to say the truth aloud. They are not coming back. Then I counted 60 slow breaths, chose the direction that followed the river downstream, and took my first step alone. The first 100 yards taught me how carefully Dalton had chosen that place. The river did not run beside a trail. It twisted through fallen trees, steep banks, and mud that pulled at my boots. I had to climb away from the water, cross higher ground, then descend before I lost sight of the current. Every few minutes I stopped and listened for an engine. All I heard was the waterfall fading behind me and wind moving through the spruce. I kept my phone in airplane mode to protect the 42% battery, switching it on only when I reached higher ground. No service, no map, no answer from Dalton. After 20 minutes, my left knee began to throb. After 40, the cold moisture in my clothes turned every gust into a blade. I wanted to hurry, but one bad step could break an ankle, and no one was coming to carry me out. That thought brought back 9-year-old Dalton clinging to my shoulders while I carried him 3 miles through a storm. "Don't leave me, Dad," he had cried. "Never," I had promised. The river narrowed beside a steep ridge. I climbed on my hands and knees, gripping roots and stones. Halfway up, the soil collapsed beneath my foot. I slid several feet and caught a branch before the slope dropped toward the water. Pain tore through my shoulder. For a moment, I hung there, staring at the gray current below. Then I heard Wallace's laughter in my head. Anger gave me enough strength to pull myself onto level ground. My palm was bleeding. I cleaned it with a mouthful of water, wrapped it in cloth torn from my undershirt, and checked the bottle. Less than half remained. Water moved downhill toward people eventually. A vehicle needed a road. If Dalton had driven into this region, an access route had to follow the valley or cross the river. My job was not to find his truck. My job was to stay alive long enough to find another human being. I began counting 100 steps, resting for 20 breaths, then repeating. It gave my fear a rhythm. On the next rise, my phone caught one weak bar. I dialed 911, but the call failed. I tried Eleanor. Her photograph appeared on the screen, smiling at our anniversary dinner, but the call never rang. I recorded a message instead. "Eleanor, I'm alive. Dalton left me near the waterfall. He took my gear. I'm following the river south." I hesitated before adding, "If he contacts you, do not tell him where I am. Save everything and call the police." Saying those words about my son nearly broke me. I saved the recording, turned off the phone, and continued. About an hour after leaving the falls, I found a boot print softened by rain. Then another. Farther ahead, I spotted a cut stump and faded orange survey tape. I followed those signs until the trees opened onto an abandoned logging track. Relief weakened my legs so suddenly that I leaned against a trunk. The track gave me direction, not safety. It could continue for miles, and daylight was fading. I ate half the protein bar, drank 2 small swallows, and saved the rest. By the time I found fresh tire marks, my knee was buckling every few steps. The tracks curved around a bend. Then I heard an engine. A battered utility truck appeared between the trees. I stepped into the road and waved both arms. The driver braked hard. A woman in a reflective jacket lowered her window but kept the doors locked. "Are you hurt?" she shouted. "My name is William Crawford. My son left me out here without my equipment." She stared at my bleeding hand and soaked clothes. "He left you where?" "Near a waterfall. I don't know its name." She unlocked the passenger door. Her name was Ruth Keller, a survey technician heading toward a maintenance station. The dashboard clock showed I had been walking for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Once inside, I asked for her satellite phone and called Eleanor. She answered after half a ring. "William, Dalton said you got angry and decided to hike alone." I closed my eyes. He was already constructing his lie. Listen carefully. I am safe now. Dalton took my equipment and abandoned me. Miles and Wallace watched him do it. Eleanor stopped breathing for a moment. Then she whispered, "Tell me this is a misunderstanding. It was planned." The silence between us held 31 years of excuses. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. I looked through the windshield at the empty road. The answer came without rage. It felt harder and cleaner than rage. Photograph Dalton's room exactly as it is. Save every call and message. Then contact Rebecca Lawson and ask what we must do to remove him from our house legally. Eleanor began to cry, but I did not take the words back. Are you sure? For the first time in years, I am. When the call ended, Ruth asked if I wanted the police. I looked at the blood drying across my palm and thought of Dalton telling Eleanor that I had walked away voluntarily. Yes, I said, but first, help me preserve the truth before my son has time to erase it. As Ruth drove toward the station, I watched the wilderness shrink in the mirror. Dalton believed he had left a frightened old man beside that waterfall. He was right about the man he abandoned. He was wrong about the man who had walked out. Ruth drove me to the maintenance station, where a state trooper photographed my injuries and recorded my statement. I gave him Dalton's full name, the truck description, the campsite, and every detail I could remember about the waterfall. When I finished, he closed his notebook and asked the question I had been avoiding. Do you believe your son intended for you to be seriously harmed? I looked at the bandage around my palm. He took my coat, map, food, flashlight, and emergency beacon. Then he lied to my wife before he knew whether I was alive. The trooper nodded slowly. That answer matters. Ruth drove me to Anchorage the next morning, and I caught the first available flight home. Eleanor met me at the airport. The moment she saw the bruises on my face and the sling around my arm, she covered her mouth. He told me you embarrassed him in front of his friends and walked away. Did you believe him? Her eyes filled with tears. For 10 minutes. Then I heard your message. I wanted to be angry with her, but I had believed Dalton's explanations for years too. We had both helped create the man who left me beside that river. Did you photograph his room? I asked. She nodded. And Rebecca is waiting at the house. Rebecca Lawson was seated at our dining table when we arrived. She had handled our wills, property documents, and business affairs for 18 years. She did not offer sympathy until she had examined the incident report, my medical records, photographs, voice message, and screenshots from Eleanor's phone. Then she removed her glasses. William, what Dalton did may be criminal, but the immediate question is whether you want him out of this house. I looked toward the staircase. Dalton had lived upstairs without rent for 4 years. His phone, insurance, vehicle registration, and credit card were still partly supported by us. Even the Alaska trip had been charged to a card connected to my account. Yes, I said. Eleanor reached beneath the table and took my hand. Rebecca explained that because Dalton had established residency, we could not simply throw his belongings onto the sidewalk. We needed written notice and proof of delivery. However, we could revoke permission for him to use our vehicles, cancel authorized user cards, end voluntary payments, secure our private rooms, and change exterior locks if we provided lawful access for retrieving his property. Do everything legally, I said. I don't want revenge he can challenge. I want consequences he cannot escape. Rebecca began preparing the notice. Eleanor and I worked through the accounts. His supplemental card was frozen. The automatic payment for his phone was scheduled to end. His access to our garage account, storage unit, and family cloud drive was removed. I changed passwords Dalton had known since college. A locksmith arrived that afternoon. I watched him replace the front and rear locks while a security technician changed the alarm codes and saved footage from the previous 30 days. By evening, the house looked unchanged, but it no longer functioned as Dalton's private refuge from adulthood. At 6:23, my phone rang. Miles's name appeared on the screen. I recorded the call before answering. His voice shook. Mr. Crawford, are you alive? You watched me ask for the beacon. He began crying. Dalton said he would circle back. When I tried to make Wallace turn around, Dalton took the truck keys and threatened to leave me too. Why didn't you call for help? He had my phone in the truck. He said if anyone talked, we would all be charged. I let the silence sit between us. Tell that to the state trooper, not just to me. He agreed to provide a statement and send photographs from the trip. One image arrived minutes later. It showed Dalton beside the packed truck that morning, holding my emergency beacon and smiling at the camera. The timestamp was 27 minutes before he led me toward the waterfall. Rebecca studied it and said, "Save the original." This makes advanced planning much harder to deny. That night, Eleanor and I sat in the living room with the lights off. For years, the sound of Dalton's car in the driveway had meant another problem we would solve. Now we knew he planned to return late the following evening, expecting his room, his money, and our forgiveness to be waiting. On the table lay the new keys, the police report, Miles's photograph, and a sealed 30-day notice. I was exhausted, injured, and grieving a son who was still alive. But beneath the grief was something I had not felt in years: clarity. Dalton had used the wilderness to show me how powerless he believed I was. When he came home, he would discover that the life protecting him had changed before he even noticed it was gone. Eleanor remained at the dining table after Rebecca left. The sealed notice sat between us like a verdict neither of us had expected to sign against our own child. "I keep thinking about the first time we rescued him," she said. "Which time?" "The science fair. He forgot the project, and I drove home, finished the display, and brought it to school before judging started. He won second place. I remembered how proud we had been. Dalton was 11. We told ourselves we had protected his confidence. He learned that forgetting the work did not mean losing the reward," I said. Eleanor lowered her eyes. "And we kept teaching the same lesson. We began listing the rescues, not to punish ourselves, but to understand the pattern. At 16, Dalton damaged my car and blamed another driver. I paid for the repair without making him work it off. At 19, he failed 2 college classes, and Eleanor persuaded the dean to let him remain in the program. At 24, he lost his apartment after months of unpaid rent, so we brought him home temporarily. 4 years became permanent, and every deadline dissolved after tears, promises, or anger. "I always thought one more chance would be the chance that changed him," Eleanor whispered. "So did I. What if this destroys him?" I looked at my bandaged hand. Leaving me in Alaska was not the beginning of his destruction. It was evidence of how far it had already gone. Eleanor flinched, but she did not argue. That mattered. In the past, one of us would set a boundary, and the other would soften it. Dalton had learned to wait until our guilt defeated our judgment. This time, we wrote the rules together. He would receive the legally required access to collect his belongings, but he would not sleep in the house. We would not pay for a hotel, apartment, phone, vehicle, lawyer, or credit card balance. If he apologized, we would listen, but an apology would not cancel the notice. If he threatened us, we would end the conversation and contact the police. If he blamed Wallace or Miles, we would return to the evidence. Eleanor wrote each rule by hand and placed the page beside Rebecca's documents. "He'll say we don't love him," she said. "Love is the reason we should have done this years ago. And if he says he has nowhere to go, he has friends, 2 working hands, and 30 days to arrange his life." Saying it hurt. Hearing Eleanor repeat, "It hurt more." "He has friends, 2 working hands, and 30 days, she said, as if teaching her heart a new language. Dalton had not created every weakness in our family. He had simply learned how to use them. I reached across the table. "We cannot change what we taught him yesterday. We can change what we reward tomorrow." She squeezed my fingers. "Then, promise me something. When he cries, don't let me surrender. When he calls me cruel, don't let me become angry. Deal." We signed the final instructions together. Near midnight, a text appeared from Dalton. "Flight delayed. Home tomorrow, around 8. Tell Dad I hope he's done sulking." Eleanor read it twice. Her face went pale, then strangely calm. "He still doesn't know you made it out." "No. And he still isn't worried." She took a screenshot and forwarded it to Rebecca and the trooper. Then she blocked Dalton from the alarm application. It was the first consequence she had ever imposed without asking me to make it softer. We went upstairs, but neither of us slept. At 7 the following evening, the process server parked across the street. Rebecca waited in her car nearby, and a patrol officer had agreed to remain within quick reach because of the open report. I stood behind the curtain and watched the empty driveway darken. Eleanor came beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "I love our son," she whispered. "So do I, but I will not help him hurt us again." Headlights turned onto our street. A familiar engine slowed in front of the house. I felt Eleanor's grip tighten, but neither of us moved toward the door. For the first time in Dalton's life, his parents were not preparing to rescue him from what he had done. We were preparing to let him meet it. Dalton parked crookedly across the driveway, left the engine running, and walked toward the house with his duffel bag hanging from one shoulder. Through the curtain, I watched him take out his key without looking at the door. He inserted it, turned his wrist, and frowned when nothing happened. He tried again, harder. The key scraped against the new cylinder. He pounded on the door and called Eleanor twice. When she did not answer, he kicked the door. Then I switched on the porch light and opened the inner door, leaving the locked glass security door between us. Dalton froze. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment he looked ill. His eyes moved from the sling on my arm to the bandage on my hand. "Dad? You seem surprised. How did you get here?" It was not, "Are you all right?" It was not, "I'm sorry." His first concern was how I had escaped the place where he left me. "A woman found me after I followed the river for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Dalton stared over my shoulder, searching for Eleanor. "This isn't what it looks like. It looks like my son took my survival equipment, abandoned me in the wilderness, and told his mother I chose to walk away. We were coming back. When? After you calm down. Miles says you promised 20 minutes. 40 minutes later, you were still driving away." His expression tightened at the sound of Miles's name. Miles is a coward. He misunderstood everything. A process server placed the notice beside Dalton's bag. His eyes stopped at the deadline. 30 days? You're evicting your own son? We are ending an arrangement you have abused for 4 years. Mom would never agree to this. Eleanor stepped into view. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "I signed it with your father." Dalton looked as if she had struck him. "You're choosing him over me? You left my husband without a coat, map, or emergency beacon, and then lied to me. There should never have been a side to choose." Dalton's eyes returned to my sling. "Did you call the police?" A patrol officer parked at the curb, answering him without a word. "You called the police on your own son?" "I reported what happened to me. Your relationship to me does not erase the act. This is insane." He tried to pay for a hotel, but the cards connected to my accounts were declined. We had also ended payments for his phone and withdrawn permission to use Eleanor's SUV. The locked door was only the visible part. The structure supporting his life had been removed. "You can't do all of this in one day," he said. "We did not," Eleanor replied. "We spent years paying for it. Today we stopped." He turned toward her with tears forming in his eyes. I had seen those tears before, after failed classes, missed payments, damaged cars, and broken promises. They had always opened our wallets and weakened our boundaries. Eleanor gripped the edge of the inner door, but did not unlock it. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked. "You have 30 days to arrange collection of your belongings," I said. "Tonight, call Wallace." Dalton gave a bitter laugh. "Wallace left for Seattle. Miles won't answer me." "Then call Clara." His gaze shifted. "She broke up with me at the airport." For a brief moment, I felt the old instinct rise, the need to solve the next hour for him. Eleanor touched my arm. The instinct passed. "You are 31, she said. "You will decide where to go." Dalton stared at us through the glass, and the anger returned. "After everything I've done for this family? Name one bill you paid this year," I said. He opened his mouth, but produced no answer. "Name one sacrifice you made for your mother." Silence. "Name one moment beside that waterfall when you cared whether I lived." His face hardened. "You always do this. You make me feel small so you can feel powerful." "No, Dalton. I made your problems small for so long that you never learned how dangerous they could become." The officer approached and asked for the SUV keys. Dalton dropped them onto the porch instead of handing them over. Then he picked up his duffel bag and the notice. At the bottom of the steps, he turned back. When you regret this, don't expect me to forgive you. Eleanor's breath caught, but she held her ground. We hope you become someone capable of forgiveness, she said. But tonight, you need to become someone capable of consequences. Dalton walked toward the street with no car, no working key, and no parent rushing after him. I watched until darkness swallowed him. Then I closed the door gently. There was no triumph in the room, only grief and the strange silence left behind when a family finally stops feeding the thing that is destroying it. 3 days later, Dalton returned for his first scheduled collection. Rebecca supervised while Dalton carried his belongings. He entered without meeting my eyes and went upstairs. 10 minutes later, he came down holding 2 boxes and wearing the expression he had used since childhood whenever he expected someone else to surrender first. Wallace planned the whole thing, he said. He thought it would be funny. I went along because I didn't want to look weak. I placed Miles's photograph on the table. It showed Dalton holding my beacon before we left camp. Wallace did not remove this from my pack. You did. He told me to. Miles heard you say the truck was far enough away to make me think. He has given a signed statement. Dalton's eyes shifted toward Rebecca. Miles is protecting himself. Perhaps. But his fear does not erase your choices. Dalton set down the boxes. You don't understand what it was like growing up with you. Everything had to be done your way. The right school, the right job, the right schedule. I never felt good enough. Part of that accusation was true. I had often been demanding and absent. Those failures belong to me, I said. Hope flickered across his face. Then you understand why No. My failures do not belong beside a waterfall. They did not pack my gear, take my beacon, or stop you from returning. A painful childhood memory can explain anger. It cannot excuse abandoning another person in danger. His face hardened. You always turn everything into a lecture. Because every time the truth reaches you, you rename it cruelty. Eleanor flinched, but remained silent. Dalton looked toward her. You know how he treated me. You used to say he cared more about work than us. I did say that, she replied, and sometimes it was true. But your father's absence did not force you to leave him in Alaska. Dalton's voice rose. So now both of you are perfect? No, Eleanor said. We are responsible for our mistakes. You are responsible for yours. He paced across the foyer. I was coming back. Rebecca opened the incident file. The vehicle's GPS record shows it traveled 46 miles away from the waterfall. At what point did you intend to turn around? Dalton stopped moving. Wallace was driving. The rental agreement shows you were the authorized driver, she said. Miles also states that you held the keys. Everyone is twisting this. I played the voicemail Dalton had left Eleanor while I was missing. His voice filled the room. Dad got angry and went hiking alone. Let him cool off. He'll find his way back. Dalton stared at the phone. I was trying not to scare Mom. You did not know whether I was conscious, injured, or dead, I said. You were not protecting her. You were creating distance between yourself and what you had done. He sank onto the stair. Am I going to jail? His first concern was still the consequence approaching him. The authorities will decide. I will tell the truth, and I will not change it to protect you. He covered his face. In the past, his tears would have been enough for me to rescue him. This time, I waited. After a minute, he whispered, What do you want me to say? Nothing prepared for me. Tell the truth to the investigator. Then decide what kind of man tells the truth when lying would be easier. And then I can come home? No. His hands dropped. So this is punishment. This is separation for our safety. Change is not a password that opens the door. It is something you prove over time, when no reward is guaranteed. He stared at me as if I had spoken a language he had never heard. Perhaps I had. In our family, apologies had always purchased immediate relief. We had never required repair. Dalton made several trips to the curb. Then he paused beside a photograph of himself at 11, holding the science fair ribbon Eleanor had helped him win. Did Mom really finish most of this? He asked. Eleanor's voice was quiet. Yes. Why did you let me believe I earned it? Because I valued confidence more than honesty. Eleanor said. That was one of many times we taught you the wrong lesson, I added. What matters is where you stop it. He placed the photograph inside his box instead of blaming her. It was a small act, too small to call transformation, but it was the first moment that day when he looked ashamed rather than cornered. Before leaving, Dalton turned to me. I don't know how to fix this. Begin without asking us to do it for you. He nodded once. There was no apology, and I did not chase one. Through the window, I watched him carry his boxes down the sidewalk, one painful load at a time. Dalton moved the last box out 27 days later. He left his key on the porch, even though it no longer opened anything. The investigation continued for 2 months. Dalton admitted the abandonment was planned, and a plea required probation, community service, reimbursement of emergency costs, and a decision-making program. I did not ask the law to become my revenge. I told the truth and stopped shielding my son from its consequences. Without our money, Dalton sold his electronics, slept on a couch, and took a night job unloading trucks. When he complained about his supervisor, Eleanor said, "Show him why you are not replaceable." She did not call his boss or send money. Dalton eventually returned to work. By winter, he was renting a room in a small house with 2 other men. He paid his own phone bill, rode the bus, and learned that groceries did not appear because someone loved him. We knew these things through occasional messages, not because we monitored him. Eleanor and I had finally stopped measuring our peace by Dalton's mood. 6 months after Alaska, a letter arrived in Dalton's handwriting. It was 4 pages long. The first page contained no apology. He described his job, the room he rented, and the humiliation of asking a manager for extra hours. On the second page, he admitted that he had expected us to weaken within a week. On the third, he wrote about the waterfall. I told myself I was teaching you what abandonment felt like. The truth is, I wanted to frighten you because I felt powerless whenever you asked me to act like an adult. I knew you could be hurt. I left anyway. There was no but after those words. On the final page, he wrote, I am not asking to come home. I am not asking for money. I only want you to know that I finally understand why an apology cannot make you feel safe with me, Eleanor cried when she finished reading. Do we answer? She asked. Yes, I said, but we answer the man who told the truth, not the boy we used to rescue. We wrote 3 sentences. We received your letter. We appreciate that you accepted responsibility without asking us to remove the consequences. Continue doing the work. Dalton sent no reply. 2 months later, Dalton completed his required service at an outdoor education nonprofit and remained as a weekend volunteer. I did not mistake that report for proof that he had changed forever. Real change is not a dramatic speech. It is a pattern that continues after no one is applauding. Still, I allowed myself to feel hope. Nearly a year after the trip, Dalton asked to meet us at a public cafe. He arrived early, paid for his own coffee, and did not bring a suitcase. The differences were small, which made them believable. He looked tired. His hands were rough from work. When Eleanor reached toward him, he waited until she chose to complete the embrace. Near the end, he turned to me. I know you spent years standing between me and every consequence. I hated you when you stopped because I thought protection was the same thing as love. And what do you think now? Love without boundaries can become permission. I had learned the same lesson from the opposite side. Dalton apologized again, this time without asking whether he could return home. I told him forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. I am working toward forgiveness, I said. Trust will move at the speed of your behavior. He nodded. That's fair. Fair was a word he once used only when he was getting what he wanted. That afternoon, we left the cafe separately. There was no perfect reunion, no promise that our family would return to what it had been. I did not want the old family back. The old family had nearly killed me while calling its weakness love. What we had now was smaller, slower, and honest. We removed Dalton from positions involving medical or financial control and funded wilderness safety education. It was not revenge. It was a boundary designed to outlive us. On the anniversary of the Alaska trip, Eleanor and I walked a coastal trail together. At a viewpoint, she asked whether I still thought about the waterfall. Every time I hear rushing water, I said. She took my hand. Far below, waves struck the rocks and withdrew. I had once believed saving my son meant never letting him fall. I know now that some people do not learn to stand until the hands holding them up finally let go. Dalton left me in the wilderness, expecting fear to make me weaker. Instead, the long road out taught me the most painful truth of parenthood. Sometimes the last rescue you give your child is refusing to rescue them again.